Most prison fights don't begin with a punch. They begin with a stare, a rumor, a chair being pulled out, or one man deciding to sit where nobody else dares. On a cold Tuesday afternoon, the prison library was quieter than usual. The only sounds were pages turning, chairs scraping across the floor, and the old ventilation system humming above the ceiling. For most inmates, the library wasn't a place to relax. It was a place to escape. Escape the noise. Escape the yard. Escape the politics. But on that afternoon, every inmate inside slowly stopped reading, because the most feared gang leader in the prison had just walked through the door. And instead of choosing an empty table, he headed straight toward one man, Mike Tyson. It had been almost 2 weeks since Mike arrived at the prison. By then, everyone knew exactly who he was. Some inmates wanted to shake his hand. Some wanted to challenge him. Others simply watched from a distance. But Mike avoided almost all of them. Every afternoon, after lunch, he spent an hour inside the prison library. The librarian had noticed something unusual. Mike always borrowed books about psychology, history, philosophy, sometimes biographies. Never boxing. When she finally asked him why, Mike smiled. "I already know boxing. I came here to learn something else." She never forgot that answer. The library sat at the far end of the education building. Old wooden tables filled the center of the room. Metal bookshelves stretched from wall to wall. Sunlight filtered through narrow reinforced windows. For 1 hour each afternoon, it almost felt like the outside world. Mike liked that feeling. He sat in the same corner every day, back against the wall, facing the entrance. Not because he was paranoid, because old habits never disappear. Because the motto had taught him years earlier. Always know what's happening around you. Mike still lived by that rule. That afternoon, he opened a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The pages were yellow, the cover nearly torn off. Someone had highlighted dozens of passages over the years. One sentence caught Mike's attention. "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He quietly smiled. Funny how a sentence written nearly 2,000 years ago made more sense inside prison than anywhere else. Across the room, 3 younger inmates whispered, "That's Tyson. You think he really reads all that stuff? I thought he'd be lifting weights." An older inmate looked up from his newspaper. That's why he was champion. The gym built his body. The books rebuilt his mind. The younger men fell silent. Just then, the library door opened. The room changed instantly. Nobody had to look. They already knew who it was. Marcus Chief Reed, the prison's most respected gang leader. Unlike most men with power, Chief never entered a room loudly. He didn't need to. His reputation walked in before he did. He nodded once toward the correctional officer stationed by the entrance. The officer nodded back. No words exchanged. Chief slowly scanned the room. His eyes settled on Mike. Still reading. Still ignoring everyone. Chief smiled slightly. So the stories were true. Behind him stood 3 younger gang members. One whispered, "You want us to clear the room?" Chief shook his head. "No." "What then?" "I'm going to introduce myself." The younger inmate frowned. "To Tyson?" Chief nodded. "By myself." Mike turned another page. Without looking up, he heard footsteps approaching. Slow, confident, deliberate. The footsteps stopped beside his table. Mike kept reading. A deep voice finally spoke. "Mind if I sit here?" Mike looked up. The chair across from him was empty. "So far." "No." Chief smiled. "Good." Without waiting for another invitation, he pulled out the chair, sat down. The sound echoed through the silent library. Every inmate looked up. Even the librarian stopped sorting books. No one had ever seen Chief asked to sit with anyone, and nobody had ever seen him choose Mike Tyson's table. Chief rested his forearms on the table. "You read a lot." Mike closed the book carefully. "I try. I figured you'd spend your free time lifting." Mike smiled. "I already know how to throw punches. I'm trying to learn when not to." Chief studied him for a moment, then laughed quietly. "That's not the answer I expected." Mike shrugged. "Most people don't ask the questions you do." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was cautious, like two chess players studying the board before making the first move. Chief glanced at the book. Marcus Aurelius? Mike nodded. You read him? Chief smiled. Once. What did you think? Chief leaned back. I understood the words. I just didn't know how to live them. Mike looked at him carefully. Most people don't. A younger inmate watching from another table whispered. What's taking so long? I thought Chief came to challenge him. Another inmate shook his head. Not everything starts with a fight. No. But around here, most things do. Chief suddenly asked. Can I ask you something honestly? Mike nodded. Sure. When you walked to this prison, were you afraid? Several inmates leaned closer. They wanted to hear the answer. Mike thought for a few seconds, then answered quietly. Every man who says he's never afraid is lying. The room remained silent. Chief nodded slowly. So what did you do? Mike smiled. I kept walking anyway. Chief looked at him for a long moment, then lowered his eyes toward the book. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at Mike Tyson the boxer. He was looking at a man who had already fought battles no one else could see. Outside the library windows, the afternoon sun slowly dipped lower. Inside, nobody had turned another page in several minutes, because every inmate sensed something unusual. The prison's two most respected men weren't arguing. They weren't threatening each other. They were talking. And somehow, that made the room even quieter. Just then, one of Chief's younger men suddenly stood up from the back table. He looked at Mike, then at Chief. His jaw tightened. He clearly didn't like what he was seeing. He took one step toward them and said loud enough for the entire library to hear, Boss, why are you talking to him like he's your equal? The library froze. Every eye shifted toward Chief. No one knew what he would say next. The library became completely silent. Nobody looked at Mike. Everyone looked at Chief. The younger gang member stood with his arms crossed. His name was Darnell, 24 years old, hot-headed, eager to prove himself. He couldn't understand why the most respected man in prison was sitting across from Mike Tyson, having a conversation, instead of putting him in his place. Chief slowly turned toward him. Sit down. Darnell didn't move. Boss, we don't share tables. We take them. Several inmates quietly nodded. That had always been the rule. Chief looked at him calmly. And who made that rule? You did. Chief smiled faintly. No. I allowed people to believe I did. The answer confused everyone, including Darnell. Mike remained silent. He simply watched. He had learned years ago that people reveal themselves when you give them enough silence. Darnell looked back at Mike. You think you're special because you were heavyweight champion? Mike shook his head. No. I think I'm just another inmate wearing orange. Darnell laughed. You don't believe that? Mike looked down at the prison uniform covering his arms. What color do you see? Darnell frowned. Orange. So do I. A few inmates quietly smiled. Chief leaned forward. You know why I wanted to meet him? Darnell answered immediately. To remind him whose prison this is. Chief slowly shook his head. No. I wanted to find out whether the stories change him. He pointed toward Mike's book. Looks like they did. The librarian continued organizing books. But she wasn't reading labels anymore. She was listening. Every inmate inside was. No one wanted to miss a word. Chief looked back at Mike. What page were you reading? Mike opened the book. Book 7. Chief nodded. I remember one line. Mike raised an eyebrow. You've read it. Chief smiled. Years ago. Mike waited. Chief quietly quoted. The best revenge is not to become like your enemy. The room fell silent again. Mike smiled. That's one of my favorites. Chief nodded. Mine too. But I ignored it for a long time. Darnell stepped closer. So that's it. We're discussing philosophy now. Chief looked at him. What would you rather discuss? Respect. Chief nodded. Good. He pointed toward Mike. What has this man done since he got here? Darnell shrugged. Nothing. Exactly. He hasn't started trouble. He hasn't insulted anyone. He hasn't asked for favors. Chief leaned back. So why would I disrespect him? Darnell didn't answer. Mike finally spoke. Can I ask you something? Chief nodded. Mike looked at Darnell. How long you got left? The young inmate frowned. 8 years. You got family? My little brother. He write to you? Darnell hesitated. Sometimes. Mike nodded. What do you want him to remember about you? Darnell looked away. No answer. Mike didn't push. He simply reopened his book. Several minutes passed. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than before. Finally, Chief broke it. You know, I've watched men spend 20 years in prison. They leave exactly the same person they were when they arrived. Mike looked up. And others. They leave worse. Mike slowly nodded. I'm trying to leave better. Chief smiled. I figured. At that moment, a correctional officer walked into the library. He immediately noticed the unusual scene. Mike Tyson, Chief, half the prison watching. He tightened his grip on the radio. You boys doing all right? Chief answered first. We're reading. The officer looked confused. Reading. Mike lifted the book slightly. So far. The officer looked around. He had expected an argument. Instead, he found 20 inmates sitting quietly. He shook his head. I'll be honest. This is the quietest I've ever seen this room. One older inmate laughed. Don't get used to it. Even the officer smiled before walking away. As the door closed, Chief leaned closer. You know what happens after today? Mike shrugged. People will make up stories. Chief nodded. They always do. They'll say we argued. They'll say we almost fought. They'll say I backed down. Mike smiled. They'll probably say I knocked you out. Several inmates laughed. Chief laughed too. Probably. Then his expression became serious. But the truth will only belong to the people sitting in this room. Mike nodded slowly. And sometimes, that's enough. The afternoon light grew softer. Outside, yard time was ending. Inside the library, the conversation had become something nobody expected. Not a battle, not a challenge, but two men comparing the mistakes that had brought them to the same place. For the first time in years, Chief wasn't talking like a gang leader, and Mike Tyson wasn't talking like a boxing legend. They were simply two men trying to understand how different lives had led them to the same prison table. Then, the loudspeaker echoed through the building. Library closes in 5 minutes. Chief looked at Mike, smiled, and said quietly, There's one more thing I wanted to ask you. Library closes in 5 minutes. Nobody stood, not even the correctional officer near the door. It was as if everyone wanted to hear Chief's final question. Chief rested both hands on the table. There is one thing I've wondered ever since you got here. Mike closed the book. What is it? Chief looked directly into his eyes. When people feared Mike Tyson. Did you ever enjoy it? The room became silent again. Mike didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the worn cover of the book in front of him. Then he spoke. When I was young, I thought fear meant respect. Chief listened carefully. Mike continued. I confused the two. I thought if people were afraid of me, they admired me. He smiled sadly. They didn't. They were just afraid. Chief leaned back. So what changed? Mike looked toward the narrow library window. One day, I realized, fear disappears the moment you're no longer the strongest man in the room. But respect can stay forever. Several inmates slowly nodded. Even Darnell looked thoughtful now. Chief reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a folded envelope. The paper was worn from being opened many times. My daughter sent this. Mike looked at it. I've carried it for almost 2 years. You read it often? Chief nodded. Every Sunday. Why not every day? Chief smiled. Because I'm afraid it'll fall apart. He carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting belonged to a young girl. Across the top it read, Dear Dad. Chief looked away before continuing. The last line says, I hope prison doesn't change the good man I remember. He swallowed hard. Some days, I don't know if she'd recognize me. Mike stayed quiet for several seconds, then asked, When do you get out? Chief answered softly, 18 months. Mike smiled. Then you've still got time. Chief looked confused. Time for what? To become the man she remembers. The words hung in the air. Nobody spoke. Not the inmates. Not the librarian. Not even the officer standing near the exit. Darnell slowly walked toward the table. This time, his face looked completely different. He glanced at Mike. I owe you an apology. Mike looked surprised. For what? I judged you before I knew you. Mike smiled. We've all done that. Darnell shook his head. No. I judged you because I wanted people to think I was tough. Mike nodded. That usually gets heavy after a while. A few inmates quietly laughed. Even Darnell smiled. The librarian approached the table. Library's closing. Nobody moved. She smiled. I'll give you another minute. Chief laughed. First time anyone's ever wanted us to stay longer. She shrugged. First time this room has been this peaceful. As the inmates slowly stood, Chief extended his hand. Not because Mike Tyson had once been heavyweight champion. Not because of his reputation. Simply because he respected the man sitting across from him. Mike looked at the hand, then shook it firmly. No cameras. No applause. No speeches. Just two men who had chosen conversation over conflict. The following morning, the story spread through every housing unit. By lunchtime, half the prison believed Mike Tyson and Chief had nearly fought. By dinner, people were saying Chief challenged Tyson to a one-on-one match. By the end of the week, some inmates claimed Mike had stared Chief down without saying a word. Others insisted the guards stopped a riot. The truth was much quieter and much more powerful. Weeks passed. Something unexpected happened. The library became full. Men who had never touched a book before started showing up. Some came out of curiosity. Others because they wanted to hear Mike recommend books. A few simply wanted an hour away from prison politics. The librarian joked one afternoon. I've got a waiting list for Marcus Aurelius now. Mike laughed. I never thought philosophy would become popular in prison. Chief smiled. Maybe people are just looking for a different fight. Officer Patterson noticed the change too. Fewer arguments. Fewer reports. More inmates asking to visit the education building. One afternoon, he stopped Mike in the hallway. You know, I've worked here 23 years. Mike looked at him. I've seen men start riots. I've seen men build gangs. I've never seen someone make reading popular. Mike laughed. I didn't do anything. Patterson smiled. You underestimate influence. 18 months later, Chief walked out of prison carrying one small duffel bag. Before leaving, he stopped by the library one last time. The librarian handed him an old paperback. It was the same copy of Meditations Mike had been reading. We're replacing it. She smiled. I think this one belongs with you. Chief looked at the worn pages, then nodded. Thank you. Years later, during a charity event, someone asked Mike Tyson, what was the toughest opponent you ever faced? The crowd expected the names. Holyfield, Lewis, Ruddock. Instead, Mike smiled. The toughest opponents aren't always people. The interviewer looked confused. What do you mean? Mike answered quietly. Sometimes, it's your own pride. Back inside that prison, new inmates still heard the story. Not about a knockout, not about a fight, but about the afternoon, when the most feared gang leader in the prison sat at Mike Tyson's table and left with something far more valuable than victory. Perspective. Because the strongest men don't always win with their fists. Sometimes, they change a room simply by choosing to listen.